with us today?
Good afternoon, Alex, and I hope I can live up to your expectations.
Oh, I'm sure you can. Believe me, I've seen the footage the guy shot of the documents. Now, Charlotte, let's go back to the beginning and start with Antony Sutton. Then we'll get into your family, and you're gracious to talk about this. I know some of it's painful, to go back and remember your father's death when you were caring for him and other things. But let's discuss how you got it to Sutton, why it couldn't be known at the time, what his book on Skull and Bones and the secret establishment covered.
Well, he was a remarkable person, and I think that for those who haven't, heard, Sutton's background was very, very establishment up until the time that he stumbled over the establishment, right? And, he was educated at the Universities of London, Göttingen, and California. He's English. And while a research fellow at the prestigious Hoover Institute, he produced the monumental 3-volume series, Western Technology and Soviet Economic Development. And other books that he wrote were The Best Enemy Money Can Buy, Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, Wall Street and Hitler, and others. And so what happened was I am the daughter and granddaughter of members of Skull and Bones. We can go into a little bit later on that. But I think that I had been in touch with Sutton in the early 80s in regard to United States policy towards the Soviet Union. It's always bothered me that I couldn't, honestly, if you really want me to say something that's going to get you famous for the rest of time, Alex, for having a #1 kook on your program, I have been coming to this conclusion ever since I came back from overseas and worked in Soviet affairs, too, in the Department of State. I don't think there ever was a Cold War. I mean, I don't think there ever was a problem between the United States and the Soviet Union. They can call it Cold War because it wasn't hot.
But that's not kooky. That's actually come out in documents.
Well, yeah, I know, and I've always felt that way, but I think...
no, but they love McCarthy. I mean, the Russians have now released the documents. New York Times headline, McCarthy was right. It turned out but they liked him, just interrupting, talking about communist, as long as it was file clerks, so they could have a police state in the name of countering the Soviets and build us into the authoritarian system. But as soon as he said the army is running the communist, boom, it was over for him because he'd found out the truth. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I think, though, that Sutton, with all of his extraordinary research giving aid to the Soviet Union, I mean, we were making it possible for the development of their country technologically and militarily.
Gave them the nukes and then executed the Rosenbergs. Go ahead.
But then, also, I ran into the marvelous book, which is really my favorite book, Charlotte's favorite book, she has thousands of books, is by George Racy Jordan from Major Jordan's Diaries. Now, I would say that and Sutton and a few of the other books that your guys took pictures of. That book, too, that really was definitely important in bringing me to the conclusion that there never was a Cold War. They had to bring the phony wall had to come down and all that, and it did, and all of this had been, in secret papers, predicted that all of this was necessary for the merger to take place.
Yeah, the Carnegies wrote about that in the 20s.
Absolutely. So anyway, so Sutton must have called me, and I guess I mentioned to him, because I was staying out at the house, I was taking care of my father in New Jersey, and I think I probably said, have you checked on the order at Yale? And he said, well, yeah, he had. And he was very, very interested. He said, what do you know? And I told him that, my father and grandfather were members of the order. I have to point out that my father really had absolutely less than zero to do with the policies of the order, which have brought us to where we are right now. My dad was a great constitutionalist, wonderful man. I can't think of, I could go on forever talking about him, and he was beloved by everybody, from the garbage man to the the head, the top people in the corporations and in Europe.
And that's why it was his daughter that blew him wide open.
And, well, he did not know that. But
no, I know, but it just shows the bloodline. Go ahead.
Yeah, but what he did do, I'll mention this first, because I was at that point working with Phyllis Schlafly putting together the book Child Abuse in the Classroom. That's quite a marvelous book, folks, and it is at Samuel's website. It's a free, you can read it. It's all the documentation on the hearings we had in the early 80s, which I was instrumental in on what they're doing to our children, the destruction of our children's morals and values. So anyway, Phyllis and I were talking about putting that book of hers together in order for her to sell it at the Republican convention coming up in, was 84, I guess. And my father was dying of cancer, and we put a little room off of the kitchen for him at home so that, he didn't have to go up and downstairs, and we'd be close to him. And so he had to listen to all this, mouth out of his daughter, Charlotte, and talking on the phone with people like Phyllis. And he heard all about globalism. I was talking about globalism and all these dreadful programs in the schools. And so about a week before he died, he looked at me and he said, "Char, if I had longer, I'd help you." So really something remarkable happened there. I think he was, Phyllis and I, or myself, or whatever, we brainwashed. We deprogrammed him. But anyway, it was during that period that Sutton found out about, the books arrived in the mail one day, 3 of them, the membership list. And so I was taking care of my father's mail, and I opened them up, and I looked at them, and let me point out at this point, I knew nothing about Skull and Bones. I knew nothing about what they did. All I knew was we had a great big grandfather clock that my father had always said, "Don't ever let it wind down." Well, my son Sam says he knows why that is, because evidently there's some sort of mysterious reason for that, because I guess they're never meant to wind down, huh? So Dad always was fussy about that. Do not let that clock wind down. You've got to keep it going. So anyway, that's all I knew, and a few other things I can tell you about, too. But I wasn't... so when I saw the list, I thought, well, I've never seen these before. So there were 3 books that with the present membership. The past membership is something at all members from the beginning, all mixed up, huh? And so I took them into my father, and he said, "Oh, gee," he said, "I've never seen that before." He said, "They never put the list in books." Okay, well, so I let him look at it, and then I took them back, and then I talked to Tony Sutton, and he said, "Charlotte, would you lend them to me?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, why not, as long as you get them back to me as soon as you can." I said, "I feel a little bit like a traitor, but I feel it's important for you to have them." So anyway, I sent them to him, and he called me a couple of days later, and he said, "This is the most remarkable experience I've ever had." He said, "I've been trying to figure this thing out for a long time," and you're not kidding, he had, with all his volumes that he was doing for Hoover. And he said, "I just have never really been able to, pinpoint where does this support for working with the Soviets and bringing this country down come from."
Stay there. We're going to be right back. Charlotte Iserbyt. They must destroy the Republic to build their system. Aaron Dykes, during the break, ran in and said, "Yeah, I was reading Sutton's book, and then I looked at it online. You've got the Brown Brother Harriman's building, which also funded Hitler. And here in the U.S., it's surrounded by all the Russian embassies and government facilities. And that's because the Russians, this was admitted at the time, were funded by the United States during Stalin's time. Now, Hitler was a little different. They funded him, told him he was going to have Western support to invade other countries, then set him up and brought him down. But the Russian system is definitely a staged event up until the 1980s and 90s, probably still staged. But you were getting into Antony Sutton, Charlotte Iserbyt, once he got the Skull and Bones membership list from you, the official internal list, he said he was blown away. Please continue.
Yeah, he just said he went and had copies made, at Kinko's or something, and then he put it all out on the dining room table, and he looked, and he said it was the first time that he understood completely what had happened, and that this was the entity, whatever you want to call it, the organization, the order, the fraternity, the whatever, that was responsible for the direction that our country was moving in, militarily, corporate-wise, and education. He saw it. And so he was thrilled. And actually, I have to give Tony credit for not blowing the whistle. I didn't ask him not to. He just felt that it wasn't right for him to identify me. You know, my dad was, by that time, he was gone. So I had no problem with that. But Tony just felt that it wasn't right, and I appreciated that. So anyway, it was very sad that he passed away, by the way, and I've always wondered about that.
He was a real gentleman. I tried to interview him. I interviewed him once, and then I tried to interview him a few years later, I guess back in '99, and he sent me, it was like 1 week before he died. Because I remember hearing like 2 weeks later he just died, and I got a kind email saying, I appreciate your work, Mr. Jones. I'd love to come on. I'm too ill. And then he dies a week later. I mean, that's a classy guy.
Well, I don't even know that he was that ill. I think he was ill. He had something wrong with, that inner ear business.
Yeah.
And that was why I couldn't meet with him way back then. I wanted to meet with him when I was in California. And he couldn't because of that. But he told me, he said, other than that, Charlotte, I'm fine. And so I believe, let's talk, we're really getting into conspiracy stuff here. I don't know why Antony Sutton died. I have no idea. I mean, of course, anybody can die. He could have had a heart attack. But I did talk to someone who was very close to him, and the feeling I got was that it was not. There were definitely questions about Antony Sutton's passing.
I may have talked to him right after he'd been poisoned then, because he said, I'm not feeling well. I can't. Come on. He was literally, it was weird. It was like that with Gary Webb, who wrote the Dark Alliance series about the CIA drug dealing. He sent me this disc that was all his material and said, you have a website, put it up. And then he called back 6 months later and he said, you never put it up? And I said, this was like in '98 or something. I said, well, I'm not very technical. I'm going to try. And we barely had InfoWars up working well then. And then I called him back. We had put up a lot of it. And he said, I'm not ready to come on yet. This is a few years later. He said, I'm writing the book, though, that's going to blow him out of the water. And he was about to come out with that book when they shot him twice in the head. And then
well, they don't have any problem doing these things, as most of your listeners know. The wonderful the transcript of the Reese Committee hearings, the 3,000 pages that we have up on Samuel's website. That's the investigation of the tax-exempt foundations, 1953. And I understand from I think it's Dan Monteith. Well, I found out from Bob Goldsboro. I bought the copy of it from Robert Goldsboro, but I didn't pay. I paid $3,000 for it. But I understand that Goldsboro was offered any amount of money to get that one copy. This is the foundations. One of the minions said, "We will pay you anything you want," and Goldsboro said, "No." Good for him, right? And then about 15 years later, I knew Goldsboro well. I said, gee, Bob, really? I mean, you're just sitting with that thing. We want to put it up on the Internet. And so he sold it to me for very little, basically, huh? So the point is this, that these people really mean business. I mean, when they're willing to pay anything for 3,000 pages of congressional testimony, because, of course, after the hearings were shut down, they went around the country and bought up all the copies that were in the libraries, huh? So anyway,
well, let's continue with Skull and Bones, one of the key globalist organizations, and what their master plan is. More about your family. Aaron's got some questions as well. Let's move quick now. You're very gracious to be joining us here. You were getting into what Antony Sutton had discovered, what Skull and Bones is, what their master plan is, how they build up the Muslim enemy that they really secretly control from the top. The low levels don't know it. They create the Nazi threat by funding it. They create the Soviet, which is on record now. They create the fake global warming, which is just made up to sell their takeover. They claim they're fixing education when really they're trying to destroy it. I mean, they are the masters of this Hegelian dialectic. And what is in these documents and what has been discovered is German sciences of brainwashing to, as you know, to create Hessian brainwashed soldiers for sale worldwide. That technology spread through Skull and Bones. I mean, quantify what Skull and Bones is from your deep research and what Sutton discovered, then Aaron's got some points.
Well, the order, I do believe that it is connected with the Illuminati. And there is some pretty sound research that connects them. It is a German order. There's no question about that. I know that. And it's the elite. Everybody knows a lot of this stuff. The elite, how many families, 200 families or whatever, more perhaps, in the country who have enough money and have been very carefully educated, whether they're Bones or even some other fraternities that are close to Bones. But I think one of the best quotes is very simple. It's right in the book cover on Sutton's book. And the reason I like it is because the guy that they're talking about, E.O. Matheson, who was Skull and Bones 1923, was a friend of my father's. I don't think they were very good friends because my father wasn't deeply involved. But my father knew him and had mentioned him. And this is what is right on the cover of the book. It says, quote, this is from E.O. Matheson, Skull and Bones 1923, to Donald Ogden Stewart, an earlier Skull and Bones year, 1916, about Matheson's, Maddie, they called him, upcoming appearance before the House Committee on Un-American Activities. So this is fascinating. Quote, as long as we have somebody from Bones who can bring pressure on the committee, I should think we'd be all right. Now, that tells you the power of someone from Bones. Now, that's Matheson talking to another Bones character. And I knew Matheson's daughter. She lived in Camden when I was on the local school board going up against all these values-destroying programs. And she was from a very elite lady, and she was the daughter of Matheson. And I went to a Christmas party one evening, and of course everybody was beating up on me then because I supported grammar, things like that, right? And I didn't like values-destroying programs. But she cornered me at this Christmas party and really beat up on me about my opposition to what was going on in the schools. I was on the school board. And I was so upset that I started to cry. Because it was in public that she was doing that. And so I just put my coat on. It was a snowy night. The moon was out and all. And I walked home. And I never forgot that because that was a daughter of an important person in the order. That's the one that I just quoted, huh? So she fell for all the garbage. I didn't. Although my father was never like him. My dad would never have been involved in hearings in Congress and lying and all this stuff. So,
but your dad, as he was dying, did talk about Bohemian Grove and...
Well, my dad, I want to correct you on this, Alex. My dad was not a member of Bohemian Grove. He was invited once.
Sure, okay.
By Edwin Blair, who was a very close friend of his. I think, they were roommates, but very close.
Sure, sorry, I got confused by that. But, I mean, to be specific, your dad did say that he didn't like it.
He went because he was invited. He went and spent 10 days or something out there, and he came home, and he said it was very lush, very elegant, very interesting lectures and all, but he would never go back. He said that. I will never go back. So that was dead. Now, I can defend my father. I cannot really defend my grandfather that much, although I loved him, and he was a mining engineer. And he was very prominent, and he was probably one of the top in the world in the late 1890s.
Wasn't Harding a mining engineer, too?
What's that?
Harding, President Harding.
I don't know. But
I mean, to be specific here, though, Charlotte, I'm not saying your dad was a bad guy. He was a great guy, obviously, and through his daughter, this information comes to us as well. I just going back into memory, I remember you saying that your dad said, you know, basically that he disagreed with it all now and that he didn't like it.
What he said, he really didn't say that. He never got that close to what it all was. He said to me a week before he died, because I was really on my white horse. My horse very dirty now, huh? But I was on my white horse from 1970 to right now, and he knew what I was doing. And he said before he died, Char, if I had more time, I'd help you. And so, yeah, I think that he was a mayor of 3 towns on Long Island and in New Jersey. He was an Episcopalian. He went to church. He was a good Christian, all that. Now, my grandfather was a Mason. My grandfather came from Pennsylvania. He was the one that I do believe, please, Grandpa, forgive me. He's the one who was very close to the Fabians in South Africa. He was out there. He opened up the gold mines in the late 1880s in Johannesburg. And I had a picture of him with Sir A. Bailey. I can't find that picture. I don't know where it is. But anyway, Grandpa...
So that's the Cecil Rhodes connection right there.
Absolutely. So Grandpa really was involved, I think. But on the other hand, he was my grandfather, and he was very dear to me, and I loved him, and he was not a snob. That's very interesting. Grandpa was the last person on earth you'd call a snob, and my father, too. The whole family's always been very, we just sort of get along with everybody, no matter who.
Charlotte, and we're not here to put your family on trial for your dad and grandfather being Skull and Bones members.
No, but I just want to make the point here that they're not all what people think they are. It's really interesting. I mean, I knew my father's best friends. They were all in his wedding. When a Skull and Bones guy gets married, all the ushers are the members of Skull and Bones in that class. And then from that time on, you see them all the time. They were visiting the house. They were my parents' best friends and their wives. Huh? And you never would have known what the basic, what their goals were. There was one who I remember in particular, my sister's father, godfather, huh? And very nice. And he, believe it or not, was the founder of the Hemlock Society,
which pushes suicide.
Did you hear me? Well, yeah. This sort of thing really did surprise me.
Well, let's talk about what it is, because from Sutton's research, the info we've got, it is certainly a death cult, a Germanic death cult, and its mainline books have now been written clearly. You've got the Illuminati going on in Germany at the time. It's founded 1832, German money, British money, the Skull and Bone symbol worn on the Nazi caps. Specifically, though, what is the end game goal from what you've researched and what you know? What is Skull and Bones? What are they after?
Well, I think, half of them or 2/3 of them are just little boys. They think they're playing little boys' games, right? A third of them mean big business, huh? One of my father's roommates, who I really liked very well, his name was Charles Spofford, and he was a very fine man, and I have nothing but good things to say about him. But when I was in the State Department in the late 50s in Middle Eastern affairs, all of a sudden I was in the elevator when the Suez Canal was blowing up, or something was going on. Something was always going on out there. But anyway, on the elevator is Chuck Spofford. And so I said, hello, Mr. Spofford, and I found out that he was the legal counsel from Davis Polk for the Suez Canal Company.
Ah.
Huh? Okay. Now, that, I did write about that in, not in Anthony's book, but in Fleshing Out Skull and Bones. I have a chapter in that book, right? I was asked to do a chapter in that book, which basically tells a lot of this stuff that we're talking about right now, Alex. So, anyway, Charles Spofford died, finally died, and interesting story. He had a horrible stroke, and he was divorced from his sort of fancy wife. He ended up marrying this lovely woman who I had known at Davis Polk when I worked there as a legal secretary. He married this gal who didn't have any fancy background or anything. She's a wonderful woman, and he spent the rest of his life, being taken care of by her. Now, these are the weird things about Skull and Bones people. You know, I mean, here he was, very famous all over the world. You could type his name in, Charles Spofford. He's a member of everything, the French Croix de Guerre, the blah-blah-blah. You know what my father said about him once? Oh, yes. He did. This is funny. At the dining room table once, my dad, he sat back. I guess he maybe had a few drinks, and he had a cigar, and he was talking about, he said, boy, it's really interesting how Chuck got that promotion. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, Chuck Spofford, the one I'm talking about now, he said, when he was just a private or something, or a lieutenant in World War II in Europe, but after he got promoted to being the undersecretary for NATO or something, and Dad said, it's really interesting how some people can rise to the top.
He was making a joke. Charlotte, we're almost out of time. All of this is intriguing information. Aaron, you've got comments about Skull and Bones.
Just a little bit about Avril Harriman, who was one of the major players in the 20th century. Hi, Charlotte, by the way.
There,
it's nice to talk to you. Yeah, I saw his name in the membership list you have. He has a bio, maybe 2/3 of a page long, and his public bio just shows how much he was involved with Russian diplomacy. It's on record that he knew Stalin more than any other person not from Russia. And then you read Tarpley and you read Sutton and these other authors about how much he and Prescott Bush at Brown Brothers Harriman were involved in setting up the Soviet Union.
Oh, absolutely, yes. Harriman is such an important one. And, it's just pure evil. That's all I can say. Any order like that, we start studying it or what their goals are. Even if they hadn't done all these awful things, the games they play and the horrible, what they go through to become a member, that I couldn't understand. My father was very sound, a very sound person. I can't even imagine him going through those ridiculous...
Well, he's young. That's why the elite put their children into these organizations, is so it can be done by their peers, because they know they'll do things that peers say that they wouldn't do if their parents were telling them to do it. In fact, specifically, let's go back to your son and his research into the clock. And I've done other research in other occultic orders where they can basically do a spell where they claim that this spirit is attached to you as long as the clock is still moving.
Well, I think that's probably what Samuel was talking about.
Yeah.
But you know what I did to it? I had these 3 gold copper balls on the top of it, and they needed to be repaired. So the guy at the shop said, well, look, I'll give you 3 eagles for the time being, Charlotte. So we took the gold balls off. There's 3 of them on the top of the clock, and I put 3 eagles up there. And, Skull and Bones must be having hysterics.
Yeah, we've shown the photo of that clock. We'll show it again here in a moment. But specifically from your son's research into it, I mean, what other occultic information do you have, or was there anything, any other little things that your father was concerned about?
No, I really can't be very helpful on that.
Well, I know that...
What I have to say about the order and the lack of attention to certain very important things that they've been doing, it's okay to write about the order. You can say anything you want about the order, but don't touch education. And that we know, because that, what's her name, Samantha, what's her name, the gal who wrote the book, when Tony's book was coming out, on fleshing out Skull and Bones?
Yes, Alexandra Thompson, I believe.
Yeah, well, whatever.
She wrote Secrets of the Tomb. Let me look up her name real quick. Go ahead. Yes.
It's important to point this out, because just before America's Secret Establishment by Sutton came out, they found out, and they got her to write that book, I think. This is what I've heard, okay? And if you look at her book and any other book that's been written or allowed to be reviewed or whatever, you see nothing about education. Nothing. And as far as I'm concerned, of course, turning over all our secrets and stuff to the Soviet Union is total treason, right? But the method, the Pavlovian, the method coming out of Leipzig, Germany. And it was Skull and Bones, it was Hopkins University that sent these guys over there originally.
It was a mind control program that they were going to bring in, and she must have gotten married because now her last name is Alexandra. No, it's Alexandra Robbins. That's her name. Go ahead.
That's her name. And if you read her book, it's good, but there isn't a single mention of the mind control method that came out of Leipzig.
Well, by the way, she comes from another, what is it, Scroll and Key or Order of the Serpent, because I had her on. She admits she comes from one of the other elite groups.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. I didn't know that. But, again, what I want to point out is that the reason that the fact that they won't mention education shows that is really the most important thing that happened was their role in bringing that horrible method over from Leipzig. And I know Tony Sutton, he was also very interested in the work done by Paolo Leone. And I want to tell your people to go on the Internet, look, and Google this book. It's called The Leipzig Connection. Leipzig, Germany, okay, connection. And it may not talk about Skull and Bones. It does talk about a lot of the German professors and everything. But that book, to me, people will say, my book's great, everybody else's book is great. I think the most important book ever written on American education is called The Leipzig Connection. And you can order it, because that's what's going in right now. Now, Antony Sutton also felt that was the most important book, because he has quoted from it in his marvelous book on the order.
Well, everything is education, and they federalized it. Now they're internationalizing it. People get more and more dumbed down. They can't communicate. And then, oh, by the way, it's an incredible article in National Geographic about Singapore and a British intelligence operative. They don't admit that, but it's public, and an admitted communist, from the big government-funded Oxford, the minister mentor. He posed as an anti-British guy to bring in the new government, and they admitted here that their system of education is to dumb people down so that they can't communicate, so they can just be factory drones. And they admit it's tyranny, and they admit the Singapore model is for the entire world. But it's just so incredible to see now, Charlotte, how out in the open they've gotten with all of this.
Well, I wish you'd send me that, will you?
Yeah, it's a National Geographic, January 2010 issue. National Geographic, Merging Man and Machine is the cover of it. And I had gotten it, for a separate issue, wanting to read about the bionic stuff, which is another system, which, again, I'm for technology, but they're using it for control. But it's got the article about Singapore, and it's just so scary. The first photograph in it basically promotes the draconian controls that they're putting into the country.
I wonder, I knew that Singapore was bad on that. I'm going to be in Singapore, actually, for a little bit. But I'm really Alex, please don't forget. You're probably going to forget, but will you get Aaron or someone to please send me at least the title so I can Google that article?
Yeah, the title is The Singapore Solution: How Did a Sleepy Little Island Transform into a High-Tech Powerhouse in One Generation? It was all in the plan. Now, they don't tell you it was British intelligence, staged the peaceful handover of power. Kind of like the Queen of England still runs Canada and Australia and can suspend the Parliament anytime she wants. It's all on record. It's the same thing here, but they admit the population is dying out. That's good. Oh, it's kind of sad.
Yeah, isn't that sad?
But that's and that people have no creativity and are slaves. But it's just how wonderful it is. In fact, show me document cam shots here, guys.
Huh.
And
I really want to have that. It's the least you can do for me.
Of course, I'll send it to you. And they talk about the minister mentor, the leader, Lee Kuan Yew, and how he rules everything, and how it's a total control society. And just how wonderful it is, and how it's the model for the rest of the planet. And you may not like it, but they know best. And And,
yes,
and
I really want that because I think that's what's going in here too. And I mean, if a child, kicks a milk carton down the corridor in the high school, he's going to have his hand cut off in Singapore. And we're getting there here.
Oh no, they say this is the model now that the global elite love it, and it's what we're going to have.
Right.
And I mean, they talk about how great it is.
Well, I just hope that the American people will. Well, Alex, I don't know what we do without your show and your character, your personality, which is so in their face. I love it.
Well, these are very sick people, and they say we're animals in here, and that the ruling elite knows best, and that freedom is bad. I mean, it's so sick though that they now just put it out in the open, Charlotte.
Well, that's why I want to see it, and if you don't send that to me, I'm going to be very upset.
Was there a photo of scanning someone's forehead?
Oh yeah. It talks about the medical tyranny and how great it is.
Oh yeah, please. Well, who knows? I can read it on the boat, and maybe when I get to Singapore, I can get in some trouble.
No. We don't want that to happen. You're not allowed to. Just like China, they shut down the only independent magazine today in China, and our government says that's good now. And now the FCC is announcing they're taking over the internet. Now, that's big news today, and Jay Rockefeller says we'd be better off without it. I mean, they're really just out in the open.
I know. Well, anyway, I don't know what else I can tell you about the order at Yale, except I'm positive that it is a branch of a very important branch of the Illuminati. I'm really pretty positive of that.
Well, it's the only direct branch to the Illuminati that's documented.
That's right.
Of the original Illuminati, and that's confirmed.
And the guys did see the book, the original book that I have, by Robeson. And that's an extraordinary book in itself. I mean, the fact that one page there sounds like out of a United States global education textbook. It's amazing. It talks about dropping borders and changing the children's values.
Charlotte, we're out of time. We're going to be right back. After the break, we're going to overdrive. Stay with us. My friends, we have Charlotte Iserbyt with us. We're not going to go too far into overdrive because the first hour was pretty powerful rants and information. But Charlotte is our guest right now, an amazing lady, the author of Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, now out of print. But you can go to her website and read it free online. Very gracious of her, but all she wants is justice. When you realize how oppressive and anti-freedom these New World Order architects are, you just want to defeat them. I mean, because our children, our grandchildren, humanity has no future. And we've got to get good people rallied against it. But I kind of ended that last hour scrambled there, trying to apologize to Georgia and other people that were patiently holding that we're going to try to go to. But just finishing up with Charlotte Iserbyt, any other points that you've got or questions for Aaron Dykes?
Well, we could probably talk all day as we did before in the interview, but I just wanted to thank you again for speaking with us and all the interesting stuff that you brought out.
Oh, is that Aaron?
Yes, it's Aaron Dykes. He's here with you.
Hello, Aaron. Yeah, well, thank you.
Of course.
Thank you, Aaron. We send you our best from here, and I just am very grateful that you guys are there because I don't know that there's any other group that's doing anything like you are doing, and your listeners all know that the Council for National Policy is just as evil as the Council on Foreign Relations. So the left and the right have the same agenda. And so we've got to understand that. And once we do understand that, we can work together sort of in the middle. And
let's briefly talk about the Council for National Policy, because the Hunt brothers, if I'm not incorrect, set that up. And some evidence showed they were actually against the globalist. But then it got infiltrated and taken over, or was it always bad? Because I've had people on, and folks have pointed this out, I wasn't even really aware of it until the last decade. And some people kind of on the left say, oh, it's even more powerful. They kind of make it a left-right paradigm. But I see CFR, Council for National Policy. A lot of people in both groups are kind of like porch masons. They're not at the top of the pyramid, but certainly now the Council for National Policy, there's no doubt it's promoting a globalist agenda. I mean, what's your view on it?
Oh, I believe so. I mean, if you take, NAFTA, Richard Allen, he was with Reagan, right, in the Reagan
Yes.
White House, and he was fired because he accepted a wristwatch from the Japanese, and he went to work for the Heritage Foundation. And he's Council for National Policy, and that's Heritage Foundation. Ed Fulner, who set up an office in Moscow when the wall came down. These are CMP people, but Richard Allen wrote NAFTA. And, so people have got to understand that, although, Heritage Foundation, turns out all these wonderful reports and everything that 90% of which you could agree with, but 10% of what they're doing is really even more important than the 90% because they have the globalist agenda. They love the UN. They want an international system. They, of course, think they're going to run it. But they're going to run it with Rockefeller and everybody else. It's a very, very bad, or bad's hardly the word. It's a very deceitful, deceptive group that I found out through trying to work with them. They hate me, but Roz Haley from Texas, down there where you guys are, she was lovely, like the grande dame of the Council for National Policy. And she's a close friend of Norman Dawes. She and I put together a project to get out of the UN, a really good project. And we sent letters to 300 or more members of the Council for National Policy to help us. Samuel, my son, typed all the labels out of the computer. This was 15 years ago. We didn't get one single response, even though Roz Haley was highly thought of in the Council for National Policy.
Charlotte, this segment's over, but now I want to get you back on about the CMP and the infiltration of conservative movements by the globalists. This is, because just like Skull and Bones, you've got Democrats and Republicans from there, correct?
You absolutely do, and I think they're more dangerous. I think that the neoconservatives are more dangerous than the left because the left tells the truth, as bad as it is. They don't lie all the time to us. We know what they're doing, but the right wing is lying.
Incredible. I'm going to have you back on then soon on the CMP. Stay with us, folks. This is important. We'll be right back.